So we've got to move away from the old way of making games where you had that fully staffed team, no matter what the game required, no matter what players required, and move to something that's more flexible, more agile, and certainly more sustainable.
Minecraft cleaning up in the way it's done is definitely a really big win for the pictures division. The big question is if it, is going to be on track to, hit $1 billion or get close to it.
Hello and welcome back to the Game Business Show. This week on the back of the hit Minecraft movie, we delve into the world of video game IPs going into film and TV. We also hear about a new game studio trying to both win over Gen Alpha players, but also becoming a case study on how to be a modern, agile game developer. And we also find out more about a new game event taking place in India designed to help India's growing indie scene. And joining me on this week's show is Corey Erickson, media analyst for Variety Intelligent Platform and Luminate. Have I got that right, Corey?
Variety Intelligence Platform.
Oh, not just an intelligent platform.
Yes.
How are you doing?
Doing all right.
I was at the video game BAFTAs last night and I'm starting to feel quite tired. So I apologize if I start to ramble.
That was a repeat of the Game Awards. Astrobot did really well, right?
Yeah, Astrobot cleaned up. I really enjoy the BAFTAs. It's always a really great event. But I have to say, so they have these in memoriam sections, which have really cropped up in video games the last few years. And somebody I met a couple of years ago, a chap called Brett Jones, who was the one of the lead artists on GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, which are two of my favorite games, did a panel together on the 25th anniversary of GoldenEye. Wonderful, wonderful guy. He got ill and he sadly died last year. But he was missing from the in memoriam section, and he's actually won 2 BAFTAs. So I was quite a wonderful event, lovely put together, and these things get missed, these things happen, and there's probably a process that needs to be gone through to get him included. But I have to say, it was the one thing about what was a really good event that sort of soured it a little bit for me. Hopefully they'll fix that. Well, we're here to talk about, the big topic for today's episode is the Minecraft movie has just broken box office records. It continues to do exceptionally well despite relatively lukewarm reviews. I think that's even being generous. And it's obviously having a huge impact on the video game as well. Have you seen the film? Have you been to the cinema, rushed out to watch it?
I have not seen the film. I have seen, the various hubbub around the film and how well it's done. I'm very impressed that it beat Barbie from a couple of years ago by a little less than 1 million in its domestic opening. And I think the global opening altogether is around 300 million. So, it's the best opening of the year so far, the best since Deadpool and Wolverine last year, which is, really fantastic for both, gaming adaptations on the film side, as well as Warner Brothers. What's so interesting about how well this film did is how, much of a win that's needed for both the film and gaming sides at Warner Brothers. Obviously, Warner Brothers Games is not involved with Minecraft to any degree. This is a Warner Brothers Pictures project altogether. But as we know, Warner Brothers Games hasn't been in a great position this year. It closed 3 studios, including Monolith, earlier this year. So for a gaming adaptation to do this well in that ecosystem, I think is certainly important for that division. It's also just as important for the 2 people running Warner Brothers Pictures, Michael DeLuca and Pam Abdi, because, there are a lot of high-risk films coming out this year that so far weren't off to a great start after the Mickey 17 opening. So Minecraft cleaning up in the way it's done is definitely a really big win for the Pictures division. The big question is if it, is going to be on track to, hit $1 billion or get close to it. I have a feeling for as good as the opening is, the sort of enthusiasm around it and the attendance is probably going to prove to have been concentrated towards the opening and not so much towards, subsequent weekends. But, just based on like all the viral videos I saw of people like losing their minds in the theater, it seems like, this was sort of, the opening was sort of the main event here. And everyone with, any kind of emotional stake in Minecraft, anyone who needed to take their kids to see something, they all showed up for this main weekend. How it does after is going to definitely be the real test to see, if it's another Mario.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because it's the same window, isn't it, of the Mario movie, which did also similar. It did over $1 billion, 1.3 billion in the box office. It does seem to be, billion seems to be almost a norm. I know Sonic, it was across 3 films, they've now done $1 billion, but it's certainly accelerating. And every event I go to now has a entire series of panels now about Hollywood and games and the crossover opportunity. And of course, it's not new, but it feels like, from my point of view, that games has become almost a new comic books.
Somewhat. I think the audience is certainly there for a lot of different gaming IP being brought into the Hollywood space. The trick is just how well the project, whether it's film or whether it's TV, can really match sort of the culture surrounding, the core gaming experience. In this case, I think clearly the Minecraft film succeeded in that regard. And keep in mind, it didn't review very well. It was not a smash by critical standards by any means. I think this is just a film where they were able to really match the culture behind Minecraft and really map a lot of what people, like about Minecraft as an experience onto a certainly loose but good enough narrative experience for, the film to prove to be, as valuable as it was to the theatrical experience. Because obviously it's never quite that simple. Last year we saw Borderlands not do very well in theaters, despite having a lot of stars attached. And I think it's just, how well one of these projects does. It could depend on various factors. It could depend on, do you have a core character that's going to bring people out? Obviously that was the case with the Super Mario Brothers movie. And we'll see if, that kind of enthusiasm extends to The Legend of Zelda next year. Or is that 2027?
2027. There's another Mario one next year.
Right.
And then it seems to be Nintendo's moving to an annual schedule with their films.
And The Legend of Zelda is going to come through Sony Pictures and not Universal, because Universal does the Super Mario Brothers movies through Illumination, but Zelda is a Sony project.
You mentioned about that culture element, because I think Minecraft is an example of those games that just taps into what Minecraft perhaps fans like. And it's the same with, I think, of Five Nights at Freddy's as another film that didn't review greatly, but seemed to really capture that audience and that franchise quite well, to the point where there's a second film this year. And it certainly, I think that's the thing with video game films. Sometimes they don't always lend themselves to sort of high quality stories necessarily, but if they can tap into that cultural affiliation fans have for these things, and they can do extremely well, and they can be well loved.
Well, what do you think of this? There was another recent bit of news on, the gaming adaptation film front, where Death Stranding at A24 now has a director in Michael Sarnowski. He last did A Quiet Place Day One for Paramount. Before that, he did a much smaller film called Pig for Neon, which was sort of, more of an artsy Nicolas Cage movie. That, to me, is one I've been a little bit skeptical of, just because, for as critically acclaimed as Death Stranding is, and, its status as, newer IP within the PlayStation ecosystem, a live action adaptation of that, to me, means a pretty big budget. So for it to be made through A24 instead of Sony was something I found particularly fascinating. And I mean, if they've got a director attached now, they're a step closer to getting this off the ground. I just, I think that is, about as ambitious as one of these projects can get, just because Death Stranding as a game, that's a much more hi-fi, graphically intense, AAA gaming experience, which, to translate that correctly over to film and have it look consistently good, that's going to require a pretty substantial budget.
Yeah, I don't think Death Stranding is a particularly big game in terms of commercial performance and success. Kojima, of course, was tied with Metal Gear Solid and was largely seen as AAA. His games still look AAA. They still punch above their weight, but I think they're more of an indie team now, effectively. So I'll be interested to see if that actually translates quite nicely to that sort of smaller budget project. The other thing actually tied to this is I interviewed Sam Lake, Remedy's creative director, yesterday. And he's obviously I talked about the projects he's got coming up. And one of the things he's most excited about is this deal with Annapurna and Remedy. And in terms of, I think of Sam Lake and Hideo Kojima as being quite similar game creators, and they're all involved in all elements of the creation of these things. They're writers as well as, game directors. And he was talking about, the ability to get involved in these things. I think that's the other element of this, right? It's that, particularly in recent years, whether it was Ubisoft as well, and then Nintendo now, there is more active involvement from the video game side in getting involved in these projects, which I know is not, they don't know how to make movies. It's not what they do, but there is an element of that authenticity and that making sure you capture the essence of the thing that you're trying to make, which can theoretically help with, which I think is what helped comic book movies sort of find their feet, was when Marvel itself got involved in making them. I'm not sure there was much of a point there, but it's
Well, no. I mean, so far, when people think of successful gaming adaptations, obviously there's the Mario movie. Anything with a monetary value attached. Mario is so far at the top of how well gaming IP has translated over to the Hollywood space. But the other two, people are very obsessed with and talk about all the time would be The Last of Us and Fallout. And of course, The Last of Us is this upcoming Sunday on HBO.
Yeah.
So that's going to be very much in the conversation again. But those were two projects where, sort of the core people involved with them were closely involved with the adaptations. With The Last of Us, you have Neil Druckmann. He's co-creator, co-showrunner, co-writer, directs 1 or 2 episodes each of these seasons. So he is about as involved as, a creator can possibly be with that. And then with Fallout, you have, Todd Howard, very, heavy on the show as a producer. And again, that's for people who want more Fallout. Yeah, sure, you have, Fallout 76 as a live service. But as far as, new Fallout games, Fallout 5 is still just like a ways and a ways away on the horizon. Bethesda has to do the Elder Scrolls 6 first before they can get to that. So, Fallout, the series on Amazon, for people who want more Fallout, that's pretty much their only option for very likely the rest of the decade.
Mm.
For that show to work, Todd Howard does have to be very, very closely involved to keep it as, Fallout of an experience as it possibly can be, despite being a TV series instead of a video game. One thing I do want to mention, since you brought it up, that Remedy Entertainment and Annapurna Pictures deal, what's so interesting about that is it's not simply them licensing, Control and Alan Wake as IP to Annapurna to, make potential film and TV projects out of. The deal has Annapurna contributing to the actual funding of Control 2. I think as much as half of the game's budget, which is a particularly unique deal, because typically the way these deals go is, it's just licensing one way or the other. This is Remedy saying, to Annapurna, if you want our IP for your own purposes, you have to actually invest in the core IP and, keep it alive, because what we do is very high quality, which means it's also very expensive. And for as good of a deal as that was for Remedy, it was a little bit messy on the Annapurna Pictures side because Annapurna Interactive had absolutely nothing to do with that deal. That deal sort of came together outside of, their own effort to try to be spun off into their own separate company. And then, as was reported in the news, the talks there kind of stalled to the point where most of the Annapurna Interactive staff ended up leaving the company altogether. And now a bunch of them are forming, a new company with some of the folks carrying over from Private Division.
Yeah. I've got some stats. I hope you won't hate it, but any regular listeners know I'm a bit of a stat person. So I was interested to see what is the impact of these time moves on video games in particular. So the Minecraft movie, obviously doing extremely well. Although it's a bit early for sales data, we do have daily active players. So on the Saturday after the movie came out, so the 5th, daily active players for Minecraft grew 9% week on week. And on Sunday, players were up 17% week on week. Now that's according to Ampere analysis. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that's because Mojang ran a bunch of activity, including releasing some Minecraft movie DLC for free the week before. If you go to the week before, the Saturday before the movie came out, daily active players were up 25% week on week, and Sunday numbers were up 14% week on week. So that's 2 consecutive weeks of mostly double-digit growth for a game that already boasts nearly 170 million monthly active users. We do actually have some data in GfK's in the UK. GfK Nielsen does the physical game sales, and they've revealed that the Nintendo Switch copy of Minecraft rose 25% in sales week on week. And in fact, it rose 8% on sales week before as well. So you've got evidence here of some growth on the game side from the film. What this sends me down a rabbit hole was, how does this compare? What normally happens? And the truth is, it varies so much depending on the game and what the strategy is and all sorts of things. If I go back to the last major video game movie, which was Sonic the Hedgehog 3, for this film, Sega actually released a Sonic game designed partially to tap into the movie with Sonic Shadow Generations. Now, I know that was technically a sort of remake, remaster, but Shadow features in the film and the game, and that's why they did it. The game launched in October, a film released in December, and during December, Sonic X Shadow Generations monthly active players increased 46%. What might have actually had a negative impact on that, however, is the game was Sega placed Sonic Frontiers, which is another 3D Sonic game released a few years ago, into the PlayStation Plus subscription service. And as a result, Sonic Frontiers is actually the most popular Sonic game in terms of players. during December, not the game designed to tie in with the movie. But overall, I think from Sega's point of view, that's a really strong month for Sonic. I'm going to stick with movies for a bit. I went to Gran Turismo. Remember that one?
Yeah.
That one wasn't like a Borderlands style disaster. I think it made it did okay in the box office. It critically a little bit more mixed, but not too negative. According to Ampere, players of that game did rise 20% month on month. And across Europe, this is GSD data, video game sales actually grew 78% month on month for the game Gran Turismo 7. But we're not talking huge numbers here, to be clear. Gran Turismo 7 was number 33 in August when the movie came out, and the previous month was number 82. So it's a big jump, but it's still number 33. It wasn't a huge driver of sales. It helped a little bit. Obviously, that month's big disaster was the Borderlands movie. Now, the previous Borderlands game, the main Borderlands game was Borderlands 3, and that actually had a big summer anyway, because it was also included in PlayStation Plus, a bit like Sonic Frontiers. It entered PlayStation Plus in July and reached 2.15 million players that month. When the movie came out, it rose to 2.16 million, so a tiny 3% increase. Sales-wise, however, August was huge for Borderlands 3. According to GSD data for Europe, Borderlands 3 sales jumped 418% and went from number 99 in the charts to number 6. But this was mostly due, a lot of headlines were running around at the time saying Borderlands movie boosts game sales, and I'm sure it helped a little bit with maybe. But actually, there was a 90% discount being made on Borderlands games, particularly on Steam. And I think that probably had a bigger impact on the performance of that game over the film. And the other one I mentioned it earlier, was Five Nights at Freddy's.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a critical darling, but fans enjoyed it. And the monthly active user count for the first game in the series on the month that Five Nights at Freddy's came out was 100% up month on month. To put that into actual numbers, at the start of October, the game had around, the first game in the Five Nights at Freddy franchise had around 10,000 active daily users. And that rose to 50,000 daily active users during the first week of the movie's release. So there's lots of evidence here of success, but it kind of depends on the approach to it. The Mario movie, which happened, all the games shot up in the charts, and that was partly because Nintendo did a big bundle around the film, Remote Mario Kart and the Mario games. There wasn't a lot of discounting going on by Nintendo, and it did cause a boost in Switch sales. But looking at The Last of Us, the first Last of Us, Sony did very little in terms of promoting it, but we can talk about TV shows. But yeah, it varies, but it seems to be how well it does largely depends on how good the product is and how much the publisher or leans into that opportunity.
Well, in the past, you did mention this in terms of the Sonic movie, but the norm used to be tie-in games alongside any kind of movie release. That's largely gone out of the way with, the embrace of live services like Fortnite and Roblox as promotional platforms, but also too for IP that is gaming based. And you just covered this, but I think the new trend going forward is, obviously it's too hefty to try to make, a new gaming experience tied to the movie. What we can do is take the existing ones and, discount them, put them on a subscription service, make them easily accessible. And you did mention how you felt you didn't see Sony do too much of this with The Last of Us, but that's not actually true, because when The Last of Us was up for Emmys at the beginning of 2024, the Emmy ceremonies were delayed because of the writer's strike and actor's strike in Hollywood. So they happened in January 2024, if I remember correctly. That is the same month they, basically updated The Last of Us Part 2 to a PS5 version. They kind of timed those two together just because since it was up for so many Emmys, they knew they were going to be promoting The Last of Us show at the same time.
Yeah, well, let's talk about The Last of Us, because actually I say it didn't do very much. It did do very well. It aired in January 2023, the show. We'll talk about Fallout in a minute as well, because the Fallout TV show, everything went up at the same time. And of course, The Last of Us was released weekly. There was what I find really fascinating, there was initially a spike in game sales at the start, as you'd expect. So IDG reported a 38% jump in sales of the game. It's not a huge jump, but it's a decent jump compared with pre-show sales. But then when the show finished, it jumped again, this time by 75% compared with pre-show sales. So actually, this is a phenomenon here. The Last of Us actually caused a spike in sales after the game after the series is finished. I don't know if that's because people tend to binge watch these things, and that's when actually there was a huge spike in viewers at that point, or if it was linked to people wanting to go back and experience the story after enjoying the TV show. I don't know what the phenomena is there. I can speculate, but it had two spikes, Last of Us game sales. In terms of engagement, though, it's actually just huge. So The Last of Us Remastered, which I think was the PS4 remake of The Last of Us, hit 1.8 million monthly active users during January when the show launched, which is a rise of 1,000% month on month. Last of Us Part 2, which was the sequel, rose 440% in monthly active users with 1.4 million people. And The Last of Us Part 1, which is the PS5 version of the first Last of Us,
The remake, yeah.
rose 347% in players to nearly 600,000.
And that was released I believe September 2022, so a few months before the show premiered on HBO.
Yeah, indeed. So that success continued into February, actually, because The Last of Us Remastered jumped again by 417% as the show continued, 2.2 million monthly players. Part 2 jumped to just shy of 1.6 million players. That's up 178%. And then Part 1 dropped 62%. And then the show finished in March, and things were still pretty strong in March. But its monthly user count, though, didn't go back down to pre-show numbers until the summer. And there's a similar phenomenon happened with Fallout. So obviously Fallout was a massive hit because I think it's Amazon's Prime's second biggest TV show after Rings of Power, I think, Lord of the Rings show. And the last Fallout game, Fallout 4, that I reported on this at the time on GamesIndustry.biz, it shot to the top of the charts, came out 9 years before the TV show. It sold over 500,000 units across Europe during that month. And according to IG, again, the sales were up 345% at its peak versus pre-show sales. And now, it's worth noting that it was severely discounted. So they followed the sort of Borderlands thing. So it wasn't just the fact there was a hit TV show. The game was really, really cheap. It was also in subscription services.
And they had updated it to PS5 as well in tandem with the show.
Yeah, there was a lot. They really lent in. What I think was most interesting, though, because is their player numbers. So according to Ampere, Fallout 4 had 10.5 million monthly active users during April, which is when Fallout came out. That was 9 million users up over March. But come May, things dropped, but only to 9.5 million. So, of course, the show all aired at the same time. This maintained. So, yes, it dropped again to around 4 million in come June. But actually, it wasn't until September that the user numbers on Fallout went back to March levels. So, although the big spike was at the beginning, it's the same with The Last of Us, or actually spike at the end for The Last of Us. There was an impact on this in terms of players playing that game for long after the show had finished. It wasn't just a quick play a game to tie in with the thing that I'm playing. It sort of stretched out across the months and months and months, which is very good. I'm interested though to see how The Last of Us Part 2 will do, because as in the TV show. The TV show I selected will do very, very well, but the impact upon the games, and the only thing I really got to base this on is the Halo TV show. There were 2 series of Halo, right? That's the reason why I find this interesting. And according to IDG, when the first show launched in 2022, sales of the game rose over 1,000%, 1,090%. Now, it's from a very low base. That's why that number's so high. However, the second series, which aired last year, barely had any impact on the game sales at all. Which, I mean, it's not unsurprising to suggest that the first series is the one likely to have the biggest sales impact. And I think it's not unreasonable to suggest that will be the case for Last of Us as well, although they believe they've done the whole new PC version of Part 2. So there is something there that might boost it. But actually, in engagement terms, the TV show did help, the second series of the TV show did help encourage players back to the game. According to Ampere, Halo Infinite and Halo the Master Chief Collection saw monthly active users rise around 300% each during February 2024, which is when Series 2 debuted. And the Master Chief Collection then rose again by 100% in March as the series continued, making it the biggest month of the Master Chief Collection since November 2022. And then the series was cancelled. So it's I'll be interested to see the second series of impact upon the Last of Us games, whether it'll have that same influence or not.
Well, I think the prospects for that are pretty good on account of the fact that this upcoming season of The Last of Us Season 2, it's not covering the full Part 2 of the video game. And I'm glad it's not doing that, because this is only a 7-episode season versus the 9-episode first season. And, Part 2 is double the length of part 1 of the game, essentially. So the fact that it's only going to cover a partial amount of the story, I think, is going to very likely drive viewers who haven't played part 2 yet back to part 2 to, see the rest of the story, because, we're in the age of sometimes as much as 2 years passing between new seasons of TV. So there's no guarantee, a season 3 of The Last of Us comes out in quick enough succession for people who are dying to see the rest of the story. Instead, they have part 2, the game, that they can go to. So that's going to work out very well for them. What I'm particularly interested to see is, and it does seem like they're starting to kind of mentally prepare people for, the realistic amount of The Last of Us seasons, given that, after part 2, there's not much more of The Last of Us. They have yet to really make any kind of commitment to a part 3 over at Naughty Dog and PlayStation. Obviously, Naughty Dog is doing a pretty high-profile space game as their next project. They announced that at the last Game Awards. So that is going to be a pretty hefty endeavor before, they can really, I think, see if they have enough resources to, work on The Last of Us Part 3 concurrently with that. Neil Druckmann has sort of kind of said some wishy-washy things about how realistic a Part 3 is. Because I know that when The Last of Us first became a huge hit, as glad as I was to see that, as much as I like the show, what I was nervous of is like, oh, is this going to be the next, Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin situation over at HBO, where the show's so big, it just kind of continues on its own past the material from the actual creator. Because obviously the thing with Game of Thrones was, Winds of Winter, the novel, had not come out, and the show just kind of went forward with, the established plotline anyway, instead of that book coming out. So right now, it doesn't seem like that's likely to happen with The Last of Us, but I guess depending on how well season 2 does compared to season 1, we don't know that for sure. Obviously, this is not Warner Brothers IP by any means. So realistically, I don't think they would be in a situation where they could easily just continue the show into material past part 2. But, right now, the future of the show is a little bit uncertain in terms of how much more they can get out of it seasonally, especially if, there are no current reported plans for a part 3.
I do wonder why Neil said that, or something, or the other showrunner said they wouldn't go past the games. But I don't know why, when you've got the person that wrote the games, who could possibly write you the next series. I just, or at least plot it out. I don't know why that's not a possibility, a way of continuing the story. If the game developers want to try and do something else, do something new, I personally think it's fine. But, well, I guess I understand the concern of sort of getting that wrong. But
well, do you think Amazon, especially as a company that does have its own gaming division, even if they're not a high output gaming division over at Amazon, do you think now that they have a hit show in Fallout that, there is a desire there for, more Fallout on the gaming side to be expedited to, better serve interest in the show? Or because Fallout, the show, is its own story that is canonical to the Fallout universe, but not adapted from any specific Fallout game, does it then not matter as much?
Good question. Can the TV show replace be the replacement for the lack of games, or is it actually the thing that might spark the development of new projects? I think Fallout's an interesting one because Fallout's gone to other developers before, including a Microsoft-owned Obsidian. So it is. You think there's a possibility there, but I don't know if Naughty Dog would ever. Although there's talks of Uncharted being given to another studio, so I don't know. Change topic completely for a second. I've got a couple of extra stories. I had a couple of interviews this week with game developers and game people. And one of them is about a new game studio has been formed by video game veterans that want to show the way in how to be a modern game studio. Dragon Snacks Games is a new team formed by Amazon and Xbox executive Jen McLean, Scopely veteran Chris Nimkowski, and strategy games expert from Oxide and Firaxis, Michelle Menard. Their game is, they had a chat with them early in the week. I was only planning to run it for this. It was a really good interview, so I might run the full thing. In fact, I will. They're targeting Gen Z and Gen Alpha as their audience, which involves them speaking directly, getting those people in to help them make the game, and watching the behaviors of the audience through things like TikTok and Discord. They talked about creating social spaces with games that can appeal to that generation, sort of that craves that sort of instant, fast-paced experiences. Here's actually a bit from CEO Jen McLean.
I was really privileged in my role at Xbox to have a team that managed the largest third-party partnerships and to see the data for games and studios like EA and Epic and Roblox and Riot. And I also co-led next-gen content strategy. And so I got to see a lot of research in addition to being a mom of an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old and a 20-year-old. And so I would watch my 12-year-old play Roblox with her phone propped up next to her, and she's FaceTiming or Discording or WhatsApping with her friends while she's playing because she's got these social needs that are not being met. My 8-year-old spent 45 minutes on his Roblox avatar and was crushed when no one noticed because he's not playing with his friends, he's playing with strangers. And that comes with a lot of disadvantages and problems and a lot of scary parts to that as well. And so for me, it was really thinking, as the industry evolves, as our players evolve, what do we need to do differently to meet our players' needs and to meet our players where they are? From my perspective, I have no interest in building a 200-person team. They're slow, they're expensive, they're big, they're challenging. We've been able to do more with a small team of 6 than teams of 60 because we all know the vision that we are building to. I want to make sure that we are doing something that the future gamers want, that gamers of today and tomorrow want, not gamers of yesterday. And I want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's sustainable because we all know or have been impacted by layoffs. Nobody wants to do that again. And so being really smart and deliberate about using outsourcers, using co-dev. The reality of making games is that you are not going to have a consistent need for every position at every part of development. And so we've got to move away from the old way of making games where you had that fully staffed team, no matter what the game required, no matter what players required, and move to something that's more flexible, more agile, and certainly more sustainable. From my perspective, and this has been true my entire career, the best thing about the game development community is that we help each other out. And by being able to say, look, this is where we think the industry is going. This is how we're doing it. This is how we think about sustainable game development. This is how we think about reaching an audience and really building for their needs. If this inspires one person to do things differently, I think it's a win. Because if we don't change as an industry, we will continue to decline. No one wants to see that happen.
That's Jen McLean there from Dragon Snacks Games. It's sort of talking about the sort of movie model there of having a small central team and then utilizing outsource developers. It was a fun thing. We did a piece on the game business a couple of weeks ago about game investment. And this studio basically ticked every box that the investors were saying they want to see from games. They want to see a game studio that doesn't necessarily be making games for themselves, but actually want to make games for a specific audience. They want a game developer that's working with that audience from the beginning and getting them involved in making the games. They want studios that can be small and lean and make use of modern production techniques, including AI, which they're doing. And honestly, Dragon Snacks Games mentioned all of that in my interview. This is all the things they're doing. I felt like it was an investor tick box, but actually they talked about the fact that it's important that this is how modern games are going to be made. Smaller teams, more outsourcing, utilizing latest production methods, and sort of being really laser focused on trying to speak to audiences that perhaps are being distracted by other things like TikTok or being won over by other things like TikTok might be the suggestion. But they're an interesting team, and they talked about social spaces as well.
Speaking to that, what's their plan to wrestle, younger potential gamers away from Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, their usual home spaces?
Well, they're almost targeting people, not so much Roblox, but younger than that. And but one of the things is to be an addition rather than the replacement. And I think they've got a challenge. I'd asked them this question. For them, it's about being on the side of those things as opposed to as a replacement for it, but also doing things that's a little bit, that really looking at how they engage with TikTok, looking at how they engage with Roblox, and working out how they can sort of tap into all of that. We'll be seeing lots of companies that would love to succeed in this place. But hey, these people Jen McLean's been at Xbox, been at Amazon, been around a while. So they certainly know the theory.
Well, I think it's difficult for the gaming space in that, yes, if you can have a socially derived gaming experience that appeals to younger gamers where your game itself can act as a platform for, them and their friend groups to spend a lot of time in. That could be very valuable. But, people age and taste and interests and interactive experiences change as people age. So I think, what's tricky and what there are no easy solutions to for, any game studio, especially ones that are launching in the space, is, how do you really approach a specific demographic, or, try to create a gaming experience that can appeal to as many demographics as possible? Because younger gamers have a lot of time to devote to an experience, but, you don't know that you're going to actually have them for more than a year, more than 2 years. And, there are still older gamers who might be more, easygoing towards a new experience and not necessarily tied down to a Fortnite or a Roblox. So, do you necessarily want to put them to the side as well? I think the gaming industry is really struggling with, trying to strategize around various demographics.
It's yes, but I think what's interesting is that phenomenon of young people like quicker experiences, fast and more instant gratification. But also older gamers don't have the time for these big, long, wieldy, this is a generalization, obviously, experiences. I wonder if there's a meeting here of the two sort of worlds, time poor adults and I don't use the word impatient, it sounds like I'm being mean, but sort of impatient young people might actually allow for an experience that can cross way over well between the two. We'll see. Well, I can still see what they build on it, and certainly in terms of creating a studio that's designed to be sustainable and affordable, and it can scale a little bit easier, and you're not beholden to big teams. The last story I've got is actually about a new a video game business and consumer event that's launching in India this week called Indie Game Utsav, designed to help accelerate India's, I hope I got that right, designed to help accelerate India's game dev scene on the global stage. They described it as a festival for Indian indie games. It takes place at Comic-Con India in Mumbai. It is being organised by Avichal Singh, who is the co-founder and game director of Nodding Head. That's the studio famous for Raji and Ancient Epic, which is one of India's most successful PC and console games. I think they're going to have, it certainly is going to be, as well as the opportunity for consumers to go hands-on with these games, there's opportunity for publishers to meet the developers. There's also going to be some workshops that they've already done some ahead of the event as well. Here's Singh himself sort of talking about the project.
Comic-Con India has also been trying to do video games since 2014 or something, if I'm not wrong. I have seen some very old photos of games being played at Comic-Con Bangalore. And that's where the picture got completed, that we would make this a home for Indian gamers, which is the Comic-Con audience, very anime, all anime fans, pop culture fans, everyone's there. There's even a video game cosplay category, so definitely a lot of gamers visited. And now it just rolled into a big thing, honestly. We had sessions with Raw Fury, there's a session with Devolver on the 8th, there's a session with Epic for Indies, and we got 9 publishers on the floor. There's a Poland publisher, Untold Tales, coming in. Singapore, there are 2 publishers coming in. And from Japan, we have Dungeon Entertainment. Exola, Xbox, Intel saw the value and became sponsors. So, that's the aim, to make this home for developers so publishers can fly in, because a lot of developers here do not have the funds or the means to fly to, say, GDC. While now there are some developers doing that, it is still a big risk because they end up spending roughly $10,000 or slightly less, $8,000 to $10,000, which is a lot, and could be a year, a lot of fun for, a studio which is just a couple of people. So I'm trying to create those opportunities here. So far, publishers have been very supportive and developers have seen the value. So we have, I think, 45, 46 confirmed games as of now.
That's saying they're talking about indie game stuff. Alongside the event, there's a Steam sale dedicated to indie games that's set to take place. I think there's 116 games involved. I think that's what he said. The last time this happened was in 2021. There was only 54 games involved. It's an interesting story, this, because India's been best known as an outsource, as a game. The game dev scene is best known for outsourcing, and its development scene is best. Its sort of audience is best known for mobile games. Nico Partners says that 77.9%, so 78% of total revenue spent on games in India was spent on mobile games. Just 14.5% spent on PC, and just over 7.5% spent on consoles. But it is attracting a lot of international attention, and platforms looking to discover new titles. We've seen the Xbox Developer Accelerator Program, which has been used a lot in India, where PlayStation have launched its Hero project in India, which is, again, trying to incubate games in that territory. Epic Games India has been giving grants to studios. Krafton also has an incubator. I think there's a recognition here that if you want to be successful in India, what might be the way to do that is to have games that are very much speak to that audience. This is the country where the biggest movies in India are Indian movies, and the biggest music is Indian music. It's very much a part of that culture. So the PUBG game that's very popular in India has an India version. I saw a game at GDC called Detective Dotson, which I thought was amazing, which is a wonderful game, but it obviously very much set in that sort of world and culture. And I actually found it fascinating as somebody who knows very little about that world to discover it. But equally, I think that's the sort of stuff that's going to probably resonate best in that country, or at least that's the theory, I think, from some of the bigger international companies that are looking to invest in this area.
Yeah, well, I mean, India alone is a bit more than 1.4 billion people. So I would say that's a pretty appealing factor to, looking for whatever growth there is still to find in the gaming industry. Focusing on, the world's biggest population centers is certainly one way to go.
Yeah. Actually, and I do have one more bit from Singh, who talks about the fact that the market is a big opportunity for studios, and also talked about the fact that some of the things that companies are doing. Here he is.
The numbers were always with India. If you just look at mobile gaming, the numbers are crazy, and especially for free-to-play games, these add a lot of value. And I've worked at Zynga for 2 years, where I worked on Farmville and Empires and Allies. So as much as, hey, India might not be the top paying nation for some of these games, I know Wales cannot exist if there's no ecosystem of other gamers. So I think India does provide a lot of value. Plus, I have seen crazy numbers being spent from India as well, even in Farmville and Empires and Allies. So people do like to spend it. It's a matter of value. Are you able to provide that value in your product, be it a movie, be it a music album, or be it video games? There are some cultural nuances, of course, but slowly everything is changing in India. Raji was played by a prime minister last year.
Really?
And it was like an event they conducted with streamers, some famous video game streamers. So there was definitely that message being sent out that, hey, this is the next big thing. And I think a cultural change is almost here, because people now know a lot about games like Black Myth. And there's a huge question going on out there. Where's the next Black Myth? Is it from India? Blah, blah, blah. So that's still far. Sony Hero Project just got here, XTAP, all these things have just started. So hopefully, and I have personally seen the quality go really high in just few years.
Yeah, Singh there. And he also talks about XDAP is the Xbox Developer Accelerator Program. I've never heard it called that, but that's what he calls the thing. The event, by the way, which is on this weekend, is co-organized by the Indian esports company, Nodwin. We're running out of time. We had a lot to cram into this episode. I'd like to thank Corey for taking part, but you've got a gaming report coming out, isn't that right?
Yes. So Variety Intelligence Platform, my team over at Luminate, we put out special reports on a monthly basis. So our May report, which is going to go live May 1st, is going to be all about gaming, also IP. It's sort of about gaming and IP together, and what, the gaming medium is coming to mean to the IP space, where the opportunities are there, but also, some typical core, gaming industry data and stats from a variety of, third-party providers, but also incorporating some of Luminate's own data on the film and TV side and streaming side as well.
So when was that out, do you say?
May 1st.
I look forward to that. And thank you for joining us on the Game Business Show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Chris.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Game Business Show. We'll be back next week with our feature show and our news analysis show. And maybe we'll have a bonus episode or two in there as well. Until then, thank you for tuning in.